lastly, although they were forgiven, although reparations were not demanded from them, although they still control 80% of the population, 80% of the economy, right? They are still racist. They do not want to allow Black people anywhere near the economy. They believe that everything that has to do with leadership and power, it must always be them. You know, the presidents of universities must be them. The CEOs of businesses must be them. The most biggest businesses, the banks, manufacturing, retail, it must be owned by them. So if a population of such a tiny group of people commands everything and all the wealth in the economy, then how on earth are they living in fear? They are lying. They are not living in fear. They are the most safest people in South Africa. They are so safe, so fucking rich, so racist, so arrogant, and so stupid. You know? And so stupid.
Fresh killer.
What up, tribe? My God, I have a very, very, very special guest here. My goodness, from 10,000 miles away. The brother is in South Africa. He's here to talk about everything concerning Black liberation in 2023. Let me properly introduce this brother. Dr. Pedro Mezzalini is a lecturer in the Department of Sociology at the University of the Free State in South Africa. At this department, he's heading the undergraduate first-year program where he teaches and develops courses that are earmarked to introduce students to decolonial sociology. Dr. Mezzalini is also a productive, engaged, and passionate researcher who has been published in peer-reviewed international journals and supervised on social justice thematic areas where he mainly examines the histories of universities, the histories of colonial apartheid cities, and how these forces connect with present-day questions of housing, land, urban space, and studentification, Black childhood, and decoloniality. Dr. Mezzalini is also a research associate in the Raymond Malabe Center for Governance and Leadership at the Nelson Mandela University, and he writes the Monday column for the Sowetan. He received his PhD in sociology in 2021 from Nelson Mandela University. So this is Dr. Pedro Mezzalini. Before we hear the voice of the hour, I do want to say the brother is young. The brother is super ambitious. Met him at the Stephen Biko Museum, Biko Museum in South Africa, and he speaks with force, and he also speaks with experience. A lot of people, a lot of academics get caught up in the intellectualism of it all, and they get stuck in books. But this brother has a history of being a soldier, you know, a vanguard soldier in terms of movements, be it Fees Must Fall, and making everything equitable for Black South Africans. He's really been in the trenches. It ain't just about things that he learned in books and things that he researched, but he really out there. And so I had to reach out to the brother. Man, I'm so blessed to have him speak to the tribe. You should be honored too. Dr. Pedro Mezzalini, how you feeling, brother? What's good?
No, thank you so much for the warm welcome. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say good evening on my side in South Africa, to you and also to all the viewers of the channel. Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's great to see you once again, my brother.
Yeah, man. Always a blast, man. So yo, let's hop into it. There is something happening in Niger. There's something happening in Burkina Faso. There's something happening in Mali and in Guinea. So the understanding is that they have now thrown off the yoke of colonialism. They are in the process of cutting ties with the French, at least, and I'm thinking with the United States with their colonial powers and taking over the resources from their countries. And I want to know, what is your assessment of this? This isn't the first time that we've heard of these things happening on the continent. Do you think that this time is different? That's one question. And the other one is, I'm just curious, wow, what started this? Like a week or so ago, maybe over a week at this point, a week to 2 weeks ago, I started looking at my YouTube and reading, and it was just like, Soiree, Burkina Faso, the revolution is happening. I was like, oh snap! Like, so
Yeah.
what happened with this, and what is your assessment, being on the ground on the continent, of what's happening right now?
Yeah. Sure. Where can I begin, man? I think let me begin with the post-COVID African continent. You know, there has been a strong rise of impatience, particularly from young people, with the direction that the continent is taking. As you would know, that the majority of people who stay in the African continent are below the age of 35. And most of them are facing unemployment, poverty, and lack of opportunities, not because they don't have the talent, but it is because the structures that are in place are preventing young people from reaching their full potential, you know. So as you all know, that the African continent has been under colonialism for about the past 300 to 400 years, and that was also the peak period of capitalism and industrial development around the world. Well, for us in Africa, that industrial capitalist development was masked as a civilizing mission, but underneath it, it was a clear-cut colonization and a brutal exploitation of African people, where the colonizer invaded the continent. It captured human beings, subjected them to, you know, a life of being laborers, if you could say, you know, where in the hierarchy of human bodies under racial capitalism, we were placed at the bottom, where we shared the bottom, you could say, with animals, you know, because all that we could supply in life was our labor power under colonialism. And as you would know, Black people in Africa, Black people, in fact, across the world, are the ones who do the most demeaning jobs, you know, like sweeping the streets, cleaning the toilets, you know, working long hours for a small amount of pay. It's always Black people across the world, because that is the system of racial capitalism that was driven together with colonization and land dispossession in Africa. Now, one thing I want to underscore, Roger, very early is that simply because independence is declared in a country in Africa, it does not mean that colonization is over, you know. The colonizer, for instance, if you take the French in the Sahel region, in the 1960s, they started to take their flags, and they left, you know. But their systems did not collapse. They did not discontinue. And that is now the next stage of colonization that many people in the world don't understand in terms of how it works, because once colonization gets challenged physically in the decolonial struggle, it does not completely die, you know. Instead, it mutates, you know. It mutates, and then it moves now to other spheres of power, like, you know, state institutions, the media, policies, you know, rules of trade. Even sometimes, Roger, it even stays in the psyches of people in terms of how they think in everyday life, you know.
The approach mutates, but the resources still go back to the same colonial power, be it France.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah, so that's why you'd find, for instance, a country like Niger, it's very rich in uranium, but that uranium makes trillions of profits for France and also the European Union, and they use uranium to convert it into nuclear power to produce electricity for Europe. But if you go to Niger, the levels of poverty are extremely high, and there's no electricity in Niger, you know.
Right.
I think it's
right.
10% of the population that has electricity in only 2 cities, and then the rest of the country stays in darkness. Yet underneath the country, there's uranium that keeps France
right.
Beautiful and extremely rich. So sometimes such conditions they breed anger and impatience amongst the young population. And that is why after COVID, you started to see, as early as 2021, there were coups, you know, that took place in Guinea and Sudan, and then they moved over to Burkina Faso, after that, and then 2022 you then had Niger, and also Mali, you know. And sometimes, you know, these coups.
Did you say? I'm sorry. Did you say in 2022 you had Nigeria and Burkina Faso?
No, Burkina Faso and Guinea was 2021, and then 2022.
Oh, so this has been going on for a while.
Yeah, it's been going on for the past 11 months, you know.
Wow, we are late. We are late getting this news.
Yeah.
I wanted to follow up with something, because you said that post-COVID, the youth are waking up. And I'm wondering, what was it about COVID and about that whole strange time in our world that caused this epiphany amongst the young people of South Africa?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, you know, sometimes, Roger, these youth struggles, you know, they are a series of connections that you could trace back as far back as the 1970s. They just keep continuing, and they just keep resurrecting, because the enemy being challenged, which is neo-colonialism, it keeps changing its tactics, it keeps mutating, you know, moving from one center to the next. For instance, if I could connect youth and student struggles in Africa with the George Floyd experience also in the United States, that also took place under lockdown conditions, you begin to see similarities, you know, whereby the claim is that we live in a democratic, peaceful, and equal society, you know. But you realize that institutions of racism are deeply entrenched in the economy, in business, and also in the state, you know. So you have instances of militarization and authoritarianism entrenched in how the state behaves as a power, particularly on Black people, you know. So young people now have started to pursue what I call epistemic freedom, which is to emancipate themselves from mental slavery, where they are able to learn about their identity and who they are, and they're also able to comprehend their systematic oppression. Because under COVID, you couldn't hide inequality. The media could not mask the existence of racism and neocoloniality anymore because it was so visible for everyone to see. I mean, most people who died from COVID are Black people who come from impoverished and overpopulated communities. And such communities are not natural designs. They are designs of a long racist system of settler neocolonialism that is still very much alive in Africa and also in the United States, you know. So that's where you are able to trace those two connections. And now there is a strong revolt against these systems, and even at a point of revolt, Roger, you know, the enemy is still very much alive. Because, for an example, if you look at the coup currently in Niger, led by Abdourahmane Chiane, and also the one in Burkina Faso, that is led by Ibrahim Traore. Ibrahim Traore is only 35 years old. And the first decision after they made the coup was to remove the military of the French out of these two countries, because Western countries, what they tend to do, once they are in control of a colony in Africa and they extract resources out, they then build a military base right next to it, a very big military base to guard their economic interests from any possible disruption, you know. So when you see, for instance, that a new leader has been elected democratically in Africa, you find that they move in very quickly to control the economic policies of that leader, you know, so that the resources of that country in Africa, they continue to develop America and Europe at the expense of African people. So African people have been wondering for so long, why do we keep voting again and again and again, but our situation of poverty does not change, yet we have so many resources underneath the soil that we walk on a daily basis? And the answer is that Western countries have installed their own puppets in these countries in Africa, and they also bully them with the military bases that are located in these countries. And you sometimes sit and ask yourself, as Africans, we don't have any military base next to America, next to Canada, next to England. So what are they doing here? You know, why are they having their military all over the borders of our country? And the answer is very simple. They are here to ensure that their interests are protected, even if it means that they cause instability and proxy wars in the country to maintain control.
Of course. Yes, sir. So in the past, we've had Thomas Sankara, also of Burkina Faso, who was for the people. He galvanized the people. They believed in him. He represented their ideas, and a coup killed him, which many believe was supported by Western powers, right? We've had years, we've had Muammar Gaddafi, who was trying to unify Africa, and he was also murdered. We've had Patrice Lumumba. We've had a number of people that have risen up and been killed, and along with them being killed, the liberation movement has been killed. What do you think about this time? Is this time different? And if so, why?
Time will tell if it is going to be different, because one of the most important things for me when I study a struggle, is how sustainable is it going to be in its mission, And by sustainability, I'm not only referring to the amount of time it spends, but I'm also referring to the strategic decisions that it is going to take on areas of development and peace,
Okay.
Let me explain what I mean by that very quickly. For an example, if you look at the country like Nigeria, which is next to Niger, right? Nigeria currently has a democratic government, and the president of Nigeria, Bola Tinubu, he is currently the head of ECOWAS. ECOWAS is the economic alliance of all these countries that are in the West African region. Now, if you listen to ECOWAS on how it talks about what is taking place in Niger and what it wants to do, you can hear that the voices coming out of ECOWAS, the voices coming out of Nigeria, are voices that are sponsored by what the French and the United States wants to do in that region. The United States and the French, they want that area to continue being a war zone.
Of course.
It must continue being unstable, because when there's instability, you can't develop your people properly. When there's war taking place and there are coups consistently, there are coups consistently, you'll never be able to stabilize your nation and then begin to have sustainable development driven, through education, small business development, all those things. Those things won't be able to happen in an environment that does not have peace, So I will never understand leaders who stay in democratic countries and they see that there is a coup next door, and then their first response is to say, let's put in a military intervention and cause further wars.
Right.
I also don't understand the interest of the West by applying sanctions in that country, because they are going to create more desperation amongst the population. Rather, what people should do, Roger, in that kind of an environment, is to seek for dialogue and negotiation and compromise, because you are not going to resolve a war if you want to meet fire with fire. You are just going to create further instability. So rather, there needs to be dialogue, negotiation, and compromise, because even these guys who have done a coup in Niger, for instance, Abdurrahman Chiane, he himself, even though he's leading the coup on behalf of the people of Niger that they agree with, also got to question him as well, because he is the former head of the presidential security unit of this president that he is removing, Mohammed Bazoum. He's been.
They need to be questioning him, right? They without just blindly following him. There needs to be a critical thinking process.
Yes, exactly. Like, for instance, Gianna is very strategic. That, okay, he has done the coup on behalf of the people. The people agree with the coup. The people agree that the French must be removed from Niger. The people agree that the uranium must be used for the development of the people of Niger. But at the same time, while that struggle is valid and it uses the language of liberation and freedom, you've got also to come back and question this person now and this group that is running this coup, and also get to understand, are these people committed to negotiation, compromise, and development? Because in a conflict, Roger, there's no side that is completely right.
Right.
So, it's like it's like that whole thing in Ukraine, you know. Zelensky believes that he is 100% correct, you know, in what he's doing. And then you have Putin this side, who also believes that he's 100% correct, which is not the case, you know. NATO and America are extremely wrong for trying to invade Ukraine with the objective of ultimately having a nuclear war with Russia and China. That is extremely wrong. To occupy the border and the territory of Russia. And we know the history of NATO in terms of what it has done in Africa. We no longer have Muammar Gaddafi with us now because he was killed by NATO. But at the same time, we must also know that the resistance by Putin of walking into Ukraine is coming at the expense of the people of Ukraine. You know, it's coming at the expense of the Russian people, and there must be space and time where we say, look, as much as we understand what is going on and what is the agenda of the West, we must also be able to say we condemn some of the decisions that we are taking, Putin, in this whole thing that you're doing. You know, to resolve the Ukraine crisis, it's only dialogue and compromise that will ultimately bring us to peace and stability, and then development would then kick off. You know,
so easily said. Very difficult these days to be carried out. We are not exposed to ideas that are different from our own. We live our whole lives in a bubble. I'm one of those people that blame social media for it, that blame the algorithm for it. And you get on social media, be it Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, they find out what you like and they only give you what you like all of the time. And I think that play out in politics. I mean, it's always been a part of politics. Yeah. But we're not even having a dialogue as normal people. There are positions that you cannot have without someone totally dismissing you, blocking you, deleting you. Like, I don't want to hear it. That's something that is lacking in society from top to bottom, as far as Western society, as far as what I see. Now, I wanted to ask you something because you brought up Putin, you brought up Russia. What is the Russian involvement in what's happening in West Africa right now? Because here's, and before you answer, I want to say another one of my concerns is that, okay, so we talk about colonialism, neocolonialism in that region, and went from France. Now the United States is definitely getting a lot of resources. And now I know that China is investing, but I know that Russia supplied soldiers, the Wagner Group, something like that, trained soldiers, et cetera, et cetera. My concern is that it's gone from the French to the Americans, and now Russia is not saying we want Africa to be free, but we want to be next in line to that region. That's my concern. What do you think about that?
Let me explain it quickly in two ways. The presence of the French in Africa and the presence of Russia and China in Africa is not entirely the same. You know, we know about the French and the British in terms of their colonization, you know, genocides, exploitation, and so on. You name it. Very cruel, very gruesome. Now, let me explain the Chinese context, and also its benefits in Africa, but also, Roger, its problems in Africa. You know, One of the things that the Western media is underreporting in America is that Asia in the past 10 to 20 years has grown extremely quickly, such that it has eclipsed the United States, you know, on industrial development, on technology, on infrastructure, you know. I mean, one of the things that shocked me when I visited China was just the beauty of infrastructure and how big it is, you know. The airports, you go to South Korea, to Singapore, it's just amazing.
Wow.
And when I compare those with the JFK International Airport in New York, nah, JFK, JFK is so behind, you know. But if you go to Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and China, and you look at the infrastructure, the technology, the transport network, the airports, it's beautiful and amazing. The amount of innovation that has been done there in the recent past, you know. So when Africa looks at Asia, it sees this fast growing bloc that has managed to achieve so much development independently from the West, you know. And the Western media is not covering these aspects. The Western media is still holding on to this belief that the Western economy is still dominating the world, which is actually not the case in the actual world that we live in and what we see, you know, because this growth of Asia, for me, it's quite natural, because most people in the whole world, I mean, in Asia, they have a population that is over 1 billion. And if you put that together with Africa and Latin America, it's where the majority of the population in the world lives. It's in the global south, you know.
They've got, hold on, real quick. India alone has got over 1 billion. China's got over 1 billion. You talking about multiple billions of people?
Yeah, you know,
There
have billions of people that far exceed the West in terms of numbers, you know. So the growth of the global south, it's a natural phenomenon in my view. Now, when Africa looks at Asia and how it has grown and managed to score these achievements independent of the West, it begins to look for inspiration and hope that, can you please come partner with us, because we also want to achieve what we have achieved, which is to cut ourselves far away from the West and self-develop, manage our own resources, and determine our own future as well. And that is at the core of the BRICS alliance between Brazil, China, South Africa, and India. Now let's come to the problem where China and Russia are problematic in Africa. China and Russia have also this slightly belief that they are superior than Africans. You know, Africans, yes, both us as Asia and Africa were both colonized and were victims of wars from the West. But as Asia, we think we are better than Africa. So you sometimes do get spaces where Russia and China, they now want to come and sort of play the role of being a deputy West now in Africa, which is to extract its resources for the benefit of Russia, for the benefit of China. And yes, they do build infrastructure.
Same thing. So that would make them equal to what France and the United States have done in that regard, right?
Yes and no, because they are in a continent. They are building institutions. They are building infrastructure. They are investing in human development, and they also allow Africa to self-develop, you know, by itself. And even our trade rules and also our debt ratios,
Okay.
they are more friendly and more accommodative for the African economy. Whereas the West, oh my goodness, it was completely brutal to the African people for centuries, you know.
Right.
So that is why now Africa is now saying,
okay,
we see the West, we see the East, you know, but at the end of the day, we want to self-determine our future ourselves.
Sure. Yes. Let me ask you this as a Black South African on the continent right now. Is the objective to be free, or is the objective to have a nicer master? Right? So exactly, right? So you talked about the West and how brutal they are. You said that, well, China and Russia, they give a little bit more, but they still look at us almost as non-humans. And I say us because I definitely feel connected to Black experience, right? And I experience a lot of that on this side as well.
Yeah.
But they still look down on us in a certain way and don't think that we are able to control our own resources, and they infantilize us in that way, and just like children. And so is it a step in the right direction to have a nicer master, or should we ultimately tell all of them, if we're going to do business, we're going to do business, but not going to let you hold our hand through this process?
I like that question. It's very good. The fundamental objective is for Africa to be self-reliant and be completely free from any kind of external control. You know, Robert Sobukwe says this very clearly, that we don't want as Africa to mimic the West. We don't want to mimic Russia. We don't want to mimic any other global power other than to mimic our own selves and determine our own destiny. You know, so at the fundamental destination where we're headed with our struggle for Black liberation in Africa is for us to be a self-reliant, independent people that is able to do everything for itself. You know, we want to break away from Russia, we want to break away from China, we want to break away from the West, and we just want to trade with everyone from an equal footing as an independent people who are in charge of their own lives. Let me make a quick example to demonstrate this what I'm talking about. Recently, there was a Russia-Africa summit hosted in Moscow.
Okay.
You know what Putin said there? He said that they are going to do everything necessary as Russia to ensure that grain goes to Africa for free. And grain is simply food, you know? And I asked myself, Roger, since when now does Africa need food from anyone else? When we have so much land and a strong agricultural system in Africa. You know, I mean, Africa is the home of food. If there is one thing you don't need, it's food. We have an oversupply of land. And Putin stands up in a podium, and all that he could say as an offer to Africa is that, no, we're going to give you food. I mean, that is an insult. It's similar to the West saying we'll give you aid, you know? We don't want things. We want our own independence. We want to produce food for ourselves and feed our own selves, you know? So you get to see this attitude of thinking that we are progressive as Russia, we are progressive as China, but at the back of our mind, we still see ourselves as better than Africans. And that is an attitude that many media houses don't report about. Roger, if I could say what I'm saying in an open platform in South Africa or in an open platform in India, they would switch the channel off. No one wants to hear this kind of truth, you know, because Russia and China are treated as mini gods, you know, that are just beyond question, simply because they have achieved an Asian miracle outside of the control of the West, which is commendable. But there is no one who should be immune from being questioned. We must critique everything we see in front of us. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves being in the belly of people we thought are with us.
Amen. Okay. One last question about what's happening in what are you optimistic about what's happening in West Africa right now?
I am optimistic for two reasons. Even though ECOWAS is threatening to intervene in Niger with violence, right? There is another underreported effort taking place in that region where Chad and Mali are trying to speak with the coup leader in Niger, Chiane, you know. They are trying to have a dialogue, a negotiation to ensure that the coup that has been done in Niger ultimately takes the population to an election where there would be where there will be peace, and then there'll also be development. And you know, the funny thing is Assimi Goita of Mali, you know, and also Mohamed Deby of Chad. These are two neighboring countries of Niger. They are not talking about military intervention. They are the only two leaders who want dialogue on what is happening in Niger. Or let me also add, Ibrahim Traore himself in Burkina Faso. He wants dialogue to be the ultimate solution of what is happening in Niger. Yeah. So you have a situation now where the Western media is so focused on the war and the military intervention that ECOWAS is trying to initiate in Niger, and no one is reporting about the peaceful plan that Burkina Faso, Chad, and Mali are coming with, so that ultimately in the end, the people of Niger get to benefit from this transition, you know, and this transition can ultimately in the end ensure that there is a complete cut and breakaway of the influence of the French in the Sahel region, you know. So it's as if now this coup is uncoordinated by people who do not think, you know, whereas there are allies of Chiane who are speaking sense to him, because Chiane is not willing to talk to ECOWAS. He does not want to talk to anyone else that is trying to offer dialogue. But Burkina Faso through Ibrahim Traore, Chad through Mohamed Deby, and Mali through Assimi Goita, saying, look, we understand the coup we've done and how valid it is, but there are areas where you need to compromise on. There are areas where you need to take the population to an election, but also we agree that French must leave the uranium of the people of Niger alone, so that we develop the Sahel region together peacefully, you know. So whenever Western media reports about the coup in Niger, the focus is always on instances where there's going to be an involvement of guns, you know. No one is covering dialogues that are taking place between Niger, Mali, Chad, and Burkina Faso that are trying to resolve the matter peacefully and in a modern, democratic manner of a civilized conversation between those nations. And most importantly, the reason perhaps also, Roger, that the area of dialogue is not being covered by the media, it is because it is Africans meeting by themselves to resolve their own challenges themselves, you know. Whereas the military intervention by ECOWAS has a strong hand of the French and the United States. And that is why it is the one that is being pumped in the media.
Well, I'll tell you something. I think that is amazing. I am just, my inner pessimist will not be quiet, because the fact that they are talking and they are civil, and that Traore has centered reason, to me on this side in the United States, that makes him that much more of a threat. You stated before, you stated a few times, we need to question everything. And that that is a characteristic of an enlightened group of people, when you question things. Here in the States, we as a collective don't question our government nearly as much as we should. And so with the Western media not reporting on those things, not reporting on the conversations, not supporting on the dialogue and the negotiating that's taking place, they control the narrative and they control the minds of the people. And I think that's all it takes for them to isolate Ibrahim Traore, whoever the real revolutionaries are, and kind of suppress that without the American protest, because we never questioned that narrative. And so if I am going to be optimistic about it, I'm going to say somehow that needs to happen here and in the West. We've got to question what's coming out. We've got to seek our own truth and our own information. And man, I'm just saying, I'm a pray on it, but I don't see it. That is the struggle here in the States. I'll say that, and that's as kind as I can be on that.
That's very true, you know, because I do have CNN as a channel here at home, and I also have BBC and Sky News as well, you know. On those channels, if I can switch it on now, you will see Ibrahim Traore being shown in his military outfit, and is presented as a very dangerous dictator who only knows guns, you know, and
setting it up.
You know, so it's set up in that fashion, as if Ibrahim Traore cannot think, he cannot smile, he cannot negotiate, he cannot compromise, he cannot develop, he cannot think of a policy, you know. No. He's a very intelligent young man who is on a serious mission to liberate the people of Burkina Faso from the French occupation, you know. And another thing also, do you know why Americans love this whole concept of going to elections, even in a state of underpreparedness? It is because they like to watch over political transitions, and they get to ultimately influence who comes who comes into power and how they are able to control them, you know. America does not mind a dictator that rigs and steals elections. If that dictator who steals elections allows America to have its own will in a country, America does not mind that dictator, you know. So these guys in the Sahel region, one of the things they do, Roger, they rig elections. They rig elections. So young people go to the ballot, they vote for it that they want, and then elections get rigged. Now, when the population goes on a protest against a leader who has rigged elections, America reports that no, a democratic leader is being dethroned. No, it's not the case. The population is just protesting against the rigging of elections.
Right.
because a leader favored by America has won elections illegally, you know. So the people go on a protest against that type of a regime, you know. So all that I'm trying to say in a nutshell is that another area that the West is not covering is what is the population of Niger saying, you know. The population of Niger, which is young people, women's movement, you know, student movement, they are in full support of this coup, you know, because this coup is finally going to set them free from the underdevelopment that has been done by the French, you know. But they have experienced coups before with the same objective in other areas of the region. And that is why now they are treating Chiano with an element of questioning him in the process of trying to fight for their liberation, which I think for me is extremely powerful, you know, that I support what you are trying to do and the message that you are giving, but I'm extremely careful about it because I want this thing to go accurately so that we don't repeat the mistakes we've done before, you know. Okay. For me, that is a very responsible population. That is a very thinking, abstract population that is self-aware. And the West is not telling us that the population is thinking like that in Africa.
Okay. True. Can we just transition a little bit closer to home?
Yeah,
man. Yeah. So Julius Malema. Mr. Malema, he's in South Africa, and he is running for president of South Africa, and he's running on a platform of basically Africa for the Africans, man. He wants, you know, in South Africa, and let me set it up. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've only visited the country a few times. You are there, have been there. It's a different type. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, the way, talk about Western media, the way that it was marketed to us when I was a wee little child. There was the story of apartheid, and then there was Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was freed, and that was the end of apartheid. Nelson Mandela went on a worldwide tour, including my hometown of Oakland, California. And for the most part, I know as a child, I just believed that apartheid was over, things were better. South Africa is free. When I went there and saw it with my own eyes, I saw that that was really far from being true. I saw that white South Africans still own a vast majority of the land and control the resources and the wealth as well. And so, Mr. Malema, my understanding is that he is like, no more. We don't have to tolerate this. We want the land, and we want Black South Africans to control our country. Is that fair? Is that fair to say?
No, your analysis is very accurate.
Okay.
It's correct. It's correct, my brother.
Okay. So I have a question for you, and because white people are scared. not just white South Africans, but I think what people all over the white diaspora. We don't talk about the white diaspora enough. The white diaspora is afraid about Malema, right? They're concerned about him, taking power. My question is that a similar situation happened in Zimbabwe with Mugabe, and he made the white Zimbabweans feel uncomfortable, and he ousted them. So what happens with that historically is that when white people leave, the wealth leaves, the resources leave, the World Bank refuses to do business with you all and let the place fall to pieces. They let the bottom fall out of it, and they use that as an example to say, look at these people, they cannot take care of themselves. I can even talk about a closer example in a city like we had white flight in a lot of the large cities here in the United States. Let's take Detroit, Michigan as an example. There were race riots after Martin Luther King was killed, and it's just like, you know, you white people got to go. You're going to pay for this. White people got uncomfortable. They went off to the suburbs, and then we see a lot of suffering and drug addiction and murder in that city, and the world country pretty much gave up on them. And so, and that's an oversimplification because we know that the drugs were put in there by outside agencies, as were the guns, and the industrial complex fed off of Black people going to prison. So we know that it was a plan, right? To basically for white people to retain control and retain wealth. Let me bring it back to South Africa. Is there a fear that if this happens in South Africa, it could go the way of Zimbabwe or the way of Detroit? Is that an honest? How do you prevent that from happening?
No, look, it's very simple, man. Firstly, one of the things that the American media and the American intelligentsia needs to dig deeper on is when Mandela was running for elections in 1994, the white people who were the opposition party against Mandela in those elections of 1994, what were they saying about him? You know, white people here had so many fears that, look, when Mandela comes into power, he's going to take our houses, he's going to take our cars, he's going to take our dogs and cats, he's going to take everything.
But it didn't happen. It didn't happen, huh?
It didn't happen, you know?
Okay.
And for anyone to think such things about Mandela, it just shows you the extent of white madness, how far it goes, you know? Because, I mean, Mandela said everything possible about South Africa going through a peaceful transition, you know? Because at that time, remember, the first African country to get liberation, independence, was Ghana, 1957, you know? And the last one was South Africa, 1994, you know?
Okay.
So South Africa had seen all the countries getting their independence right in front of it, whilst it was still fighting for its own freedom.
Right.
And South Africa had studied what happens once independence is obtained. One, the colonizer does not go, it does not give up.
Okay.
Right? Once you take over, the colonizer pretends as if it is gone, but it just mutates into other systems in the country. So you inherit a state from them that you can't use to uplift your people first, because the structural policy environment and the fiscus, it is still being controlled by the IMF and the World Bank in Washington, you know? So you can't uplift your population out of poverty. Secondly, if you try to take the land away from them and you take your economy, you cut them out of the resources, you tell them to get out, to go back to where they came from, Washington comes for you.
Okay.
Right? It could either be the assassination of your leader, which is what happened to Lumumba and Sankara, you know, Amilcar Cabral, Chris Hani, or they impose sanctions which is what happened in Zimbabwe. It's what happened in Mozambique. You name it, right? Or they just manipulate your currency and trade rules, you know, so that you get systematically trapped in underdevelopment. Lastly, 1994 was just 4 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union that supported the struggle for liberation in South Africa.
Sure.
So Mandela looked around and he thought that, look, this approach of demanding reparations and take over of all resources from white people is going to perpetuate the war, especially in South Africa, where apartheid was extremely violent and brutal towards Black people. You know, I mean, apartheid took too long. You know, it ran in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. It was too long, you know. And not only was it too long, it was extremely brutal. It was an extremely brutal system. So there was extreme fatigue in South Africa by the 90s with apartheid. So Mandela believed that he can build a country from forgiveness, you know. Black people forgive white people for what they've done, and then let's build a country from forgiveness, which today is showing us that was actually a very naive idea, you know, because now we have two things, Roger, going on. Firstly, white people here, they know what they did, and they can't believe that they've been forgiven. So every day when white people pass through Black people here, they have so much fright and fear because they think that we're going to attack them because they know what they did, you know? So white people spend so much money and time trying by all means to stay as far away from Black people. Their houses are isolated in strange suburbs, in areas that are very hard to find. They take their kids to extremely private schools where they try to be by themselves as much as possible. Even in the university system, they are now busy building private universities because in public universities, we have protested for free education. So whenever Black people protest for their human rights, white people get frightened because they think that we're going to kill them. Because they know that they are guilty of a crime that they were not punished for. So every time in their heads, they have this you know, psychological frightness. Whenever someone mentions the word revolution or transformation or social inclusion or social justice, you know, every time you mention those words, they get extremely, extremely frightened. Now, lastly, although they were forgiven, although reparations were not demanded from them, although they still control 80% of the population, I mean 80% of the economy, right? They are still racist. They do not want to allow Black people anywhere near the economy. They believe that everything that has to do with leadership and power, it must always be them. You know, the presidents of universities must be them. The CEOs of businesses must be them. The most biggest businesses, the banks, manufacturing, retail, it must be owned by them. So if a population of such a tiny group of people commands everything and all the wealth in the economy, then how on earth are they living in fear? They are lying. They are not living in fear. They are the most safest people in South Africa. They are so safe, so fucking rich, so racist, so arrogant, and so stupid, you know? And so stupid. So Malema now is reviving that spirit of Black people coming back now to the conversation to do what Mandela was supposed to do in 1994. Take the economy back, take the land back, take all the institutions and everything back. And if white people want to remain in Africa, they need to accept Black leadership and Black management and Black power in government and in the economy, and they must live under us because this is our continent, this is our wealth. They are the ones who are the visitors. They need to let go of white supremacy and begin to accept that in Africa, they are going to live below Black people and need to accept the authority of Black people in their own land. Because when they go to China, they accept the authority of the Chinese. They accept the leadership of the Chinese and the management of the Chinese. They don't tell the Chinese what to do. The Chinese tells them what to do because the Chinese controls China, you know? So in Africa, the same thing must happen. The same rules must apply. You know, they must not automatically think that we're inferior simply because we're Black. No, they need to accept that in Africa, you will live below Africans. You must obey the authority of Africans because you're in Africa. So Malema is about that story, and his popularity is growing extremely fast. He's the most popular leader in South Africa at the moment, loved so much. My wife loves Malema so much. I think she's even watching Malema now in the bedroom. I'll check it now. But that's what is going on.
Yeah. So look, let me. So part of the appeal of Malema is to pick up where Mandela left off, right? And I realize that there's so many shortcomings in this. The end of apartheid, which came with so much fanfare and celebration, and everything. And you look at it and things haven't changed, right? Once all the smoke dissipates, it's just like, oh, we're still in the same situation. Now, I wanna recenter that question when the World Bank pulls out. I guess if white people indeed, if they do flee, then what would be the plan, and how does one get the World Bank to do business with Black South Africans the same way that you do business with Arabs, and you do business with China, and you do business with Britain, and you do business with Washington? Because I think that that's the biggest fear. I think that they look at Black people as not being able to, basically Black people need to be controlled. They need to have someone like that. Idea is so inherent in the subconscious mind of white people, and the World Bank reflects that. So how do we prevent, because it seems as though Julius Malema is real. He's not about talk, he's about action from what I see. How do we prevent South Africa from going the way of Zimbabwe or Haiti or any other country that had the gall to revolt?
I'll answer that in two ways. Firstly, South Africa is a constitutional democracy.
Okay.
And Malema is going to win elections through democratic means. He might not win them next year. Maybe next year he will, because at the moment he's the third biggest party, is number 3.
Okay.
Maybe next year he might go in as number 2. And then the ANC, of course, it will get below 50%. And then Malema then will be forced to run the country with the sitting president currently, President Ramaphosa. So we might have Ramaphosa as the president and Malema as his deputy, or vice versa, you know, amongst the two of them, you know. That will happen if Malema gets second place, you know. But if he keeps the third place again, it's going to be a bit tough. But one thing I can assure you, 2029
Mhm.
he will then get the outright majority and be number one,
Okay.
right?
Okay. And
And
then
lead by himself. Now, what's going to happen at that period is that South Africa is calculating about the BRICS arrangement.
the BRICS.
And the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India,
Right. I'm sorry. Yes.
China, and South Africa, So that BRICS alliance. For instance, if you look at the constitution of the IMF, it says the IMF headquarters will be where there is the biggest economy. So that's why the IMF is in Washington, right? And America controls, well, it thought it controls the entire planet. Like America is just all over, right?
Sure.
But now what's going on is Asia has grown so quickly such that it has overtaken America. Now, if Asia is the biggest economy in the world now,
Okay. Yeah.
do you foresee the IMF now moving its headquarters to Beijing?
Right.
Which
that relationship, so the World Bank would be somewhat, I don't want to say obsolete, but you would go to China. You wouldn't have to go to the World Bank. Is that?
Yeah, what will come is what I call the BRICS Bank, or the New Development Bank.
Okay.
Which will grow to be extremely strong, such that it replaces the World Bank and the IMF. Hence, now there's a strong push of de-dollarization,
Yeah.
And there are so many countries in the global south that want to join the BRICS alliance, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, Argentina, Uruguay, Ethiopia, Burundi, Singapore, you name them. There are so many countries located in the global south that want to join the BRICS, and they want to build this new development bank that will ultimately be an alternative of the IMF and the World Bank. So you just leave the West with its own crazy institutions of white supremacy and white madness, and then you build alternative institutions on the side that will ensure that every country that has a shift, a political change, where white people are replaced by black people, there are no sanctions, there are no disinvestments, because the new development bank, now managed by the global south, will be there to protect those countries. So that is the calculation for 2029. So Malema wants to use the next few years to ensure that that alliance between Asia, Africa, and Latin America is built and anchored, and it becomes strong, and it gets to have its own bank and its own institution, so that when we begin to pull out, we are safe.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent, man. So, hey, I have one more question. I appreciate you staying up late. There's a 10-hour time difference, man. Appreciate you, Professor. I know
Yeah.
very busy. But my last question, man, as we talk about how racism impacts the psyche of everyone, particularly of Black people, right? We have this internalized racism. When I was on the ground in South Africa, I heard a lot of talk about corruption in government, right? The government is corrupt. And I'm not here to say whether that's true or not true, but I also heard a few echoings of people saying that things were better under apartheid, right? Yeah. I'm sorry. I heard that, man. I heard that. Outside of your circle, I heard that, and not just once. I heard that a few times. And you can take that question wherever you want to go, but there seems to be with internalized racism a problem with some Black people accepting Black empowerment when you've been conditioned to
Yeah.
to work and do your best and thrive under white rule. And when I say thrive, I mean thrive for a Black person, right? And
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
happy with the trinkets that you get, okay?
Mm.
So my question is, and I'm open to being wrong on anything that I'm saying. If I'm wrong on anything, point it out, it's okay. But my question is, was someone like Malema, who is not apologizing, who is not stepping lightly, who is saying that
Mm.
I am Black, this is a Black country, it's
Mm.
absurd that we even have to fight for this at this point. Like, that's his stance. With
Yeah.
not only, I pointed out how he made some white people uncomfortable, but he also makes a lot of Black people who have entered the middle class, he's making them uncomfortable as well.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Question: how do you get Black people who have suffered psychologically under apartheid and
Yeah.
racism to accept Black empowerment from a leader such as Malema, that wants to control the economy? How do you get those Black people to accept that without saying, oh, he's corrupt, he's this, he's that, etc.?
Yeah.
Process.
No, that's a very good question, Roger. Firstly, let's go back to the concepts again. The when we talk of decolonization, decolonization is like a term that I would say it's an omnibus of many different kinds of decolonization.
Okay.
So in the 1960s, we fought for what is called political decolonization, whereby we just wanted our countries to be democratic, to be free from colonial control. Then in the 21st century, the struggle now has moved to what I call economic decolonization, whereby now the gold and the resources in Africa, we feel like, yes, we are recorded as the richest continent in the world in terms of mineral wealth, but the ownership of those resources is not in Africa. As a result, people in Africa live in poverty, but the gold in Africa is making England and America rich. Hence the fight for economic independence, economic decolonization. But now there's a third layer of decolonization that is invincible, that is extremely difficult to win, which is now mental decolonization.
Yeah.
Whereby now coloniality is entrenched in the mind, but not only in the mind, but also in knowledge. In other words, how people imagine and interpret the world, they interpret the world using their mind, using their cultures, using their knowledge, And that struggle, Roger, it won't be won like how political independence was won. Because political independence can be an event. You have a date that, okay, July 4th, this is the date.
Sure.
But with mental decolonization, you don't have a date. It's an ongoing, difficult struggle that will need to be fought by many committed generations, because that is the most difficult one to win. I mean, also in America, the same comments that you say you've had in South Africa, they're actually global comments amongst Black people. Although America received its form of independence maybe around the 60s or the 50s, you still have Black people in the American population who lack self-belief, who believe that they should be governed by a white person, you know. So it tells you that in America, 60, 70 years later, the struggle for to destroy mental enslavement is still ongoing, you know. So South Africa is undergoing a similar struggle, you know, whereby we're trying to convince people who were treated like animals for 300 years. We are trying to convince them that they are actually human beings. Because colonialism and apartheid, one thing they did, they cemented this strong belief that Black people are not human beings. Black people are just animals who are very cheap to dispose, you know. So, Roger, what you now have amongst the Black population, amongst the township, you find a Black man killing their girlfriend cold blood. A person that they said the previous day they are in love with, you know.
You said you have a Black man killing what in cold blood? What did you say?
Killing their partners.
The partners. Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
They kill their partners, or you find, you know, gangs of Black young men killing each other, you know, in the township.
Yes.
The township in the US would call it the
hood.
The hood, yeah, you know. So, and that's a pattern with settler colonies, you know. America, Kenya, South Africa, Australia, Canada, you find the exact same instances of violent crimes amongst Black people within themselves, because there's a struggle for mental decolonization that is very difficult to win, because not only does white people see them as animals, but they see each other amongst themselves as animals, you know.
Yes.
So the Black person does not value the life of the next Black person, because the system of colonization has taught them for generations that they are non-humans, you know. So it will begin first with self-respect and self-belief. Once we begin to see each other first and foremost as human beings who deserve liberty, who deserve human rights, who deserve wealth, no one will go to government to steal the money that was meant to build electricity and water for Black people. Because that corruption that you hear about, Roger, it's a collusion between Black leaders in government who want to be rich very quickly and white businesses that want to maintain profits from a Black government, you know. So there's a collusion between these two systems. The white economic system that has all the industries. Because government, for instance, if government wants to build a freeway in South Africa, it cannot do that on its own. It usually calls a private company to come help it build that road. So items of development in South Africa are privatized, you know. They are built by the private sector that is in the hands of white people. So when Black people in government who are in power, they want to steal, they collude with white businesses. And they make sure that maybe billions of rands that were meant to build a freeway, they end up in the pockets of these elites, you know. And then Black people suffer in the end, because the people in power see them as animals who don't deserve to have highways, bridges, water, and electricity in their areas, you know. So the amount of plunder of public resources, it happens in areas that were meant to develop Black people. Black areas in South Africa have no development, not because there's no money, but because the money is being stolen by these elites. And you have these black elites, which Frantz Fanon called the underdeveloped bourgeoisie, the junior bourgeoisie. It's people who just got their freedom now and they want to be rich very quickly, you know, because they've been dehumanized for so long. Yes, so instead of them being patient in building their wealth and building real sustainable businesses, they want to take shortcuts by stealing money so that they look rich in the eyes of the public, you know. And that is at the core of the problem in South Africa. So if you listen to Malema carefully when he speaks against white supremacy and he speaks strongly against corruption.
Yeah.
You know, because he does not want to see the oppression that was done by white people now being done by black people on other black people.
Right.
You know,
right.
That practice of being corrupt that was being done by white people under the apartheid regime, we can now come into the state as well and continue with that behavior as black people amongst ourselves, you know. So to emancipate the minds of black people from enslavement is what is going to set us free as a people here in South Africa. And Roger, that is why I'm a teacher, you know. That is why I work in a university. That is why I'm a lecturer. That is why I pursue every day to be a professor.
Right.
It is because I strongly believe that it is in the area of knowledge, it is in the area of the mind where we are going to truly liberate our people. Because once you change the archive where people draw their ideas from, which is the pieces of literature and knowledge where they source what they think from, if you can change that and remove the white supremacy out of it, and then put in a black message of self-reliance, self-confidence, and dignity, then black people will begin to see each other as human beings, and then they'll be able to treat each other with respect, and they'll see each other as a people who are worthy of being in power and in control of the economy. And that is how we are ultimately, finally going to liberate ourselves as a people. And our destination ultimately is to destroy racism in South Africa so that we can have a society that treats each and every human being with the values of humanity. So by me serving black people with total commitment, it is actually me contributing to humanity, because what white people did to humanity, they took black people out of the human race. They took black people out of the human family and they placed them at an animal level. So when you are serving black people with commitment, you are not being racist towards whites, right? When you serve black people with commitment, you are actually uplifting them as a people back to humanity, you know? So serving black people with commitment is to actually serve humanity, because you want them to return to being human beings again, so that we can ultimately destroy racism and have a South Africa with a human face. Now, if I were to take you and me back to the Steve Biko Museum, a people with a human face was the philosophy of Steve Biko.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
My guy, how can people find you? Do you have any books in the works? How can people support you? What's the social media plug? Whatever it is you need to
plug. No, people can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. My name on those social media accounts is Pedro Mzileni, at Pedro Mzileni. The book I'm writing will come out next year. I'm going to submit the manuscript this December. It's titled the Black Proletariat of the University, Apartheid Planning, Studentification, and Neoliberalism in South Africa. So I'm looking at the connections between apartheid, post-apartheid, and how they impact young Black people and childhood in cities that have universities.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My goodness, tribe. Dr. Pedro Mazzolini did not disappoint. Please support him, follow him, be on the lookout for that book. Look him up on YouTube. He's worth the follow, as I'm sure you know by now. I appreciate you, my guy. And just thank you for your time, man. It's all good. You can finally get yourself some sleep, man.
Yeah.
All right, man. Peace Tribe. Y'all know what to do. Subscribe to the tribe. You understand? Like this, comment on this, share this with 7 people, your auntie, your baby mama, your little cousin, and your uncle too. We need to get this word out about what's happening on the continent, all right? Thanks for your help in advance. Peace, tribe. And another one.
Yes, man. Thank you so much, bro. Thanks, man.